Turning now to a once-in-a-century political development, the impeachment trial of a Texas state official. Attorney General Ken Paxton is underway in Austin, Texas, right now. These are live pictures from the trial of the first witness testifying. As impeachment managers and Paxton's lawyers began opening statements this afternoon, earlier today, Paxton was presented with 16 articles of impeachment that included 7 instances of abuse of office and 2 instances of constitutional bribery. Now, back in May, the Republican-controlled Texas House voted overwhelmingly to issue the articles against Paxton after reports surfaced accusing the Attorney General of abusing his office to help a prominent Texas real estate investor in return for the investor's help covering up Paxton's extramarital affair. Now, Texas senators, 18 Republicans and 12 Democrats, will hear the case and rule on Paxton's future in office. That excludes Paxton's wife, who is a sitting senator but cannot vote on the proceedings. Joining me now to discuss this, NBC News senior reporter Jane Tim, who's following the trial in Austin, Texas. And I'm also joined by Zach Despart, politics reporter for the Texas Tribune. Thank you both for joining me for this really historic day in Texas. Jane, let me start with you and just walk us through what has happened so far. What are your key takeaways from this first day of trial?
The House impeachment managers have just called their first witness in the chamber behind me. When I left the room to come out and talk with you, Kristen, he was going over his conservative bona fides, trying to convince him that the senior staff, which is one of the first witnesses who was called, of Paxton, the ones who reported him to the FBI in 2020 for suspected corruption, are conservatives, not rhinos, which is one of the first questions that they were asked. Now, of course, this all fits into these allegations of corruption that were passed overwhelmingly by the House of Representatives. Now, Republican Rep. Andrew Murr, one of the Republicans in those House impeachment managers, he had this to say in his brief opening statements. Let's take a listen.
The oath of office that we all took to protect the citizens of state and to uphold the laws of this state and this Constitution means something. It isn't just words on paper. It's literally an oath to God. And Mr. Paxton had an obligation not to abuse his office for his own benefit. He betrayed his constituents and the sacred public trust that's been given him.
Murr spoke for less than 20 minutes of the hour of allotted time for the opening statements. He promised that the witness testimony would offer chilling detail on just how slowly the staff of Attorney General Paxton learned about what he called the slow creep of corruption of their former boss.
Jane Tim, thank you for your reporting there from Austin, Texas. We really appreciate it. Zach, let me turn to you now. Let's do a little bit of a deeper dive into these accusations. We're talking about 16 articles of impeachment, more than 4,000 pages of documents detailing these accusations. Break down what the key takeaways are for you, and also this relationship between Paxton and the businessman Nate Paul, if you would.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, the crux of this impeachment trial is about the relationship between Attorney General Paxton and Nate Paul, a real estate investor here in Austin. Essentially, the House managers are alleging that Paxton repeatedly abused his office to help Mr. Paul, essentially letting Paul use the powers of the Attorney General by influencing an outside counsel that Paxton had hired without telling the rest of his staff, and use that outside lawyer to go after the enemies of Nate Paul, including police who had raided his house, including business rivals, including people he was involved in lawsuits with.
And how were the articles of impeachment presented today? Talk a little bit about the optics of this and what actually stood out to you witnessing this really historic moment there.
Sure. You mentioned that the House overwhelmingly voted to bring these articles of impeachment to the Senate. The House and the Senate are both controlled by Republicans. So really the audience here is the Republican senators in the upper chamber who will ultimately determine whether Paxton is convicted. The drama from this morning is there were a bunch of pretrial motions brought by Paxton's team asking senators to dismiss the case out hand. It would have ended all today. There wouldn't be a trial. Senators said, no, we want to hear the evidence here. At most, Paxton only got 10 of the 30 votes. So there is a sense that Paxton could be in real trouble here because he had so little support among Republicans in the vote so far today.
How extraordinary is that? I mean, nationally, we don't see that, right? We have not seen a break with the leader of the GOP, former President Trump. And yet here you have a very different situation in Texas. Why do you think that is?
I think the House, the volume of evidence that they presented, like you mentioned, they published 4,000 pages of evidence last week. They had presented this in several hearings in the spring when they brought the articles of impeachment. What the House is trying to do is say there is so much evidence here that it is not conscionable, it is not politically possible for the Republican senators to ignore this, even though Ken Paxton, like they are, is a Republican.
Really fascinating politics at play there. And one of the other elements that just makes this such a unique circumstance is that his wife is a sitting state senator and also on the witness list. What are you expecting of that? And to what extent do these charges of this extramarital affair play into what's unfolding there at the Capitol?
It is certainly an interesting and also awkward spectacle to have Mrs. Paxton, Senator Paxton, present for the whole trial, even though she is not voting. We expect that there will be significant time spent in detail discussing the affair, not for salacious reasons, but purely because it relates, according to the House managers, so closely as to why Ken Paxton was doing these things for Nate Paul, because Nate Paul, they say, was helping cover up the affair and helping him carry out the affair.
And just finally, what will you be looking for in the days ahead as this trial unfolds?
I mean, we'll be seeing if there's any movement to suggest that the political calculus has changed for those Republican members who will ultimately decide the outcome. So far, they've said they want to hear the evidence. If that's going to be the case the rest of the way, I think Mr. Paxton could be in trouble.
Zach Despart, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Great conversation, great reporting.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.